home prices may suffer the second largest crash since World War II, as interest-sensitive sectors of our economy are being crushed due to the Fed raising interest rates faster than ever before. And Wharton School's professor of finance, Jeremy James Siegel, is just one of many finance experts as well as economists that have given their bold housing predictions. The second largest crash since World War II. Now, should we pay attention to history? Can we learn from the past events and the prior decisions of our policymakers? I think that we can and that we should learn from prior decisions our policymakers have made that affect our economy. Like this Fed's decision to raise interest rates 7 times in 2022, for instance. Will this Fed's decision go down in history as another huge mistake, as interest-sensitive sectors like housing sales have halted? Will years of homeowners' equity be lost for millions of Americans, and if so, for how long? Will housing ever be affordable again? Welcome back. In this video, we're not just talking about now. We're going to see how the economy and the housing market overall has fared in other uncertain economic times. And then I'm going to give you my personal thoughts if you care to stick around. When headlines start talking about important financial sectors collapsing like housing, and we start seeing big company layoffs in the news, it usually starts grabbing our attention and dominating our conversations. And whether you lose your job or not, it's easy to see where the prices of life's essentials like housing have caused us to question our economic stability. In my business, primarily housing, sales have virtually halted, and sentiments are pretty low. Primarily because the roof over our head is becoming less affordable for many Americans. Housing, also known as shelter, other than food and water, is extremely important for so many reasons. And unfortunately, housing costs are becoming a real problem for our society. German Lopez authored a New York Times article back in July, headlining Homeless in America. Lopez writes, shelters across the U.S. are reporting a surge in people looking for help, with wait lists doubling and tripling in recent months. Inflation is compounding the problem. Rent has increased at its fastest rate since 1986. The origins of the current homelessness crisis go back for decades to policies that stopped the U.S. from building enough housing. This is why, for me, it's so important that we take a look back in history, to look back at policy decisions that have affected Americans. I often wonder if our decision makers are looking back at past policies and their effects, or are they just driving forward with current agendas? And from someone that has been serving the housing industry in one aspect or another for over 30 years, I do often wonder, why isn't there more affordable housing? The dream of homeownership became a reality for many veterans as they were returning home from World War II and starting their families. The federal government then subsidized home builders in order for them to create mass production housing in an effort to satisfy massive demand. Houses were small and looked identical to each other, very basic construction, but very affordable. At this time, only the wealthiest of Americans had one-of-a-kind homes. The lack of available housing and the increased demand caused the federal government to pass the Housing Act of 1949. Its goal was a decent home and a suitable living environment for every American. In the 1950s, we had a post-war surging economy. Real estate was booming. However, in the 1950s, the housing shortage increased and the real estate industry was slow to respond. And at this time, people were moving from the crowded cities out to the surrounding suburbs. The Federal Highway Act of 1956 increased the development of our freeway system. And this, combined with the increase in car ownership, made it not only desirable, but possible for Americans to move to the outer rings of the city where they would have more land and cleaner air. Now, what made the housing shortage post-World War II so bad was that just a few years before, from 1929 to 1939, the Great Depression caused a 90% drop in the production of new homes. And by 1940, homeownership had dropped to a low of 43.6%. Housing demand was literally met by massive construction just 1 month after the announcement of the end of World War II. And Time magazine headlined, "Builders got the go-ahead for their biggest boom yet, almost entirely free of government control." Now, though we have experienced many recessions since the end of World War II, housing has continued to appreciate in value over the years. Owning a home had proved to be a great investment for Americans. That is, until we hit the Great Recession of 2008. For many, they remember this period as a time that they lost their homes due to foreclosure, they lost their jobs and their savings. Now, today, many economists and finance experts, just like Professor Jeremy James Siegel, believe the housing market just might be in for another historic crash for the second time since World War II. You see, going back to the early 2000s, the U.S. was seeing a massive housing bubble. Though this was different than our current housing bubble, we still watched home prices back then go through a massive increase and a massive rise in pricing from 1997 to 2006. Actually, home prices skyrocketed during this time. And by the end of 2003 through 2004, the Federal Reserve had then reduced rates to somewhere around 1%. And as of the first quarter of 2003, the median home price in America had risen to $186,000. But over the course of the next 4 years in 2007, the median home price had shot up almost 40% to almost $260,000. And once the bubble had burst in 2007, it only took 2 years for median home prices to crash 22% to about $208,000. Now, it seemed like dropping interest rates back in 2003 is one of the reasons that accelerated home prices so much. Now, the question is, should the Fed had seen the housing bubble that burst in 2007 years before, and by this I mean, should they have then started raising rates much earlier to curb then the house price acceleration of almost 10% year over year for 4 straight years? Now, many feel that the Fed was slow this go around in raising interest rates and that they should have started at least back in 2021, and that maybe by raising interest rates back then, it would have slowed the home price growth that we've seen over the last 2 years so that many more Americans could afford the price of a home. Now, let's have a listen.
My feeling is that the vast majority of inflation is behind us. I have also voiced strongly the opinion in the media that the Fed is misreading current inflation, particularly because of the way the government collects housing statistics. They still think housing inflation is going on a very rapid rate, when in fact all the evidence on the ground is that house prices and rental prices are now declining, not rising. But because of the lagged way in which the government collects those statistics, they show they'll see the housing sector, which is a very important sector of core inflation, continue to rise throughout the rest of this year and early 2023.
Now, according to this Wharton finance professor, he said that the Fed should have raised the interest rates at least at the end of 2021, and said possibly it would have been better to start doing so by the end of 2020. Siegel has also recently been quoted telling CNBC, "I think we're going to have the second biggest housing price decline since post-World War II period over the next 12 months. That's a very significant factor for wealth and for equity in the housing market." And the article goes on to say that the Fed's aggressive tightening campaign is already hitting rate-sensitive sectors of the economy, adding that fears that the central bank will keep rates higher for longer are spooking markets. Now, the question is, will we see another historic housing market crash just like 15 years ago? I guess we'll soon find out, but as promised, here's my 2 cents. I believe that though many people believe wealth is a wonderful thing, the lack of it, or in contrast, greed for more of it, probably has more of a negative impact on our society than anything else. My hope is that in 2023 that we come to realize more of God's purpose in our lives, and that we love each other more, and that we come to realize that safe, affordable housing, that roof over our heads, is extremely important to our society, and that our government would propose and enact rapid legislation that would encourage home builders to build more affordable housing that we so need in our country and around the world. So have a happy and safe new year, and I wish you and yours the very best in 2023. And if you like this video, you can let me know that you did by hitting that thumbs up. And whether you're new to our channel or not, if you haven't already subscribed, go ahead and do so now and hit that alert bell. It'll let you know every time we upload real estate content just like this. See you next time.
Sachs Realty, Maryland broker number 607720, office number 443-318-4514, equal housing opportunity.